that is our gastrula. Gas like stomach because it forms a sac. So at the ends, these would pinch together. So you've basically you've got this oblong, that's the endoderm, covered by mesoderm, covered by ectoderm, but then there all are small openings at both ends, which are going to become the mouth and the anus. What's shown up here is the process of gastrulation, or forming the gastrula. Blue for ectoderm, red for mesoderm, yellow for endoderm. This might be a surprise. We actually have a yolk sac. That is a little area where the endoderm folds off and stores some nutrients while the placenta is still forming here. And they've even labeled some of the areas and what they're going to become. So, ectoderm will form the integumentary and nervous systems. Mesoderm forms the muscles, bones, cardiovascular, and the kidneys. Then the endoderm forms all the linings of the internal organs, all the mucous membranes. So the lining of the alimentary canal, lungs, the bladder, and so on. We can see here the testes are part of mesoderm. So we have to get from this to all of that, and that's the long part of development. As the gastrula is forming, so are the membranes. This part here with these three stripes are the three germ layers that will become the embryo, or the embryo itself. This is the yolk sac, also formed of endoderm. The ectoderm also comes around and forms a space, and that's going to form the amniotic membrane. Out here, this chorion comes from the trophoblast. And here we can see where it's making all these little fingers coming out to form the placenta. Those are called chorionic villi. The chorionic villi are one of the ways to do genetic testing on an early embryo. They try to bring the needle in and take a piece, and then they test the cells for things like Down syndrome and genetic disorders. The amnion from ectoderm will form the amniotic sac of fluid. The chorion from the trophoblast will form the placenta. So the placenta itself is the only organ I know of that's formed from two different people. The chorion from the offspring and the endometrium from the parent. And it produces hormones to maintain the pregnancy. The corpus luteum only needs to keep producing progesterone long enough for the placenta to develop. And at that point, the ovaries could even be removed and the placenta would cover everything necessary to complete the pregnancy. Here's what a little area of placenta would look like. These are the fetal portion from the chorionic villi, and this is the endometrial portion. And what you'll have is blood in sinusoids in the endometrial portion, a barrier so that none of the actual cells cross through. Blood vessels in the chorionic villi, and then waste can pass out to be removed by the mother. Nutrients and oxygen can pass in. The umbilical cord connects the embryo to the placenta. It has 2 arteries and 1 large vein. Which one of those is going to have the oxygenated blood? The red one. Is that the artery or the vein? Yep, it's the vein. So umbilical, like pulmonary, the oxygenation levels are switched because the umbilical arteries are pumped out from, the blood is pumped out from the fetal heart into the placenta where it gathers the oxygen and the vein brings it back. Any other questions on development so far, placenta and cord? Okay. After the gastrula, we start developing the organs. This is called organogenesis. And we'll just hit some highlights from here on out. Week 4 forms the neural tube, which is going to become the central nervous system. What happens there is just the ectoderm is going to fold in on itself, very much like pinching off a vesicle. Except that it happens lengthwise, not just as a ball. That inner piece that splits off is the neural tube. That will become the central nervous system. The mesoderm at this point also forms a functioning heart. The circulation isn't complete, but the heart is pumping. Weeks 5 to 7, we form other main organs, and the face and limbs start to develop. So near the top, you can see the top thing is the head, and that second little bump is an arm. There's a bit of a leg. There's still a tail at this stage. As the main part of the body has to grow to catch up with the spine, which isn't actually bones yet. The embryonic stage ends at the end of week 8. This sentence doesn't quite work. The part of the chorionic villi, so it starts out as a complete ball. Only some of it is touching the uterine wall and forms the placenta. The other parts are going to degenerate. So you don't have a complete chorion surrounding the embryo. And that leaves only the amniotic sac surrounding the embryo. Most of the fundamental development is complete at this point. You've got at least the beginnings of all the organ systems. Any malformations at this point are not going to be easy to fix. So here's a couple of different embryo views. At the top, we're looking at around 5 weeks, so days 35, 37. There's the beginning of an eye and limbs. The limbs are lengthening. Days 40 to 45, we're starting to see fingers and then toes. So typically, things near the top develop a little earlier than things near the bottom. Here's 7 weeks. It's starting to look human, although, here's a photo as well. Just before this, before you can see fingers and toes, there's this thing, I think this is really neat, called the phylotypic stage. What that means is all animals within the same group, which is vertebrates, look about the same there. for us, it's just before 7 weeks, and we look about the same as a chicken on day 5. I couldn't find a good picture of it. All the pictures were day 6 when they're starting to develop a beak. But I have seen the eggs in a development lab, and it's like there's a little baby in there.
That's right.
And then further down, here's the end of week 8, and this is when it looks human and doesn't really look like anything else. And that's where we mark the switch over to the fetal stage. Fetus means little one. So the fetal stage is the rest of pregnancy, when the offspring looks more human and is continuing to develop. The major changes are growth of the body and limbs. The head, the earlier you are, the larger the head is proportionally. And that pretty much continues until puberty is the younger the child, the larger their head is for their body. Formation of bones. Around the 5th month, muscles start to contract. And that's when you start to feel some movement. Sometimes you can feel it in the 4th month. It's much more coordinated movement in the 5th. Subcutaneous fat starts being deposited around month 7. So a baby born before that is usually very thin and has a lot of trouble maintaining body temperature because there's no insulation. One of yours was that early? That's why you're nodding? Yeah. Yeah. The skin's not very opaque at that point either. They look very red because you see the blood through it. There are some differences in the cardiovascular system in the prenatal stage. The blood has a higher hematocrit, so more red blood cells. The hemoglobin is a little bit different. It has a stronger affinity for oxygen. It has to in order to take the oxygen from the maternal hemoglobin. The additional red blood cells make sure there's more hemoglobin, so the oxygen it can get, it's got more to carry. This actually points to, this is the reason actually most newborns have a little bit of jaundice, is once they start breathing, they're getting more oxygen. They don't need as many red blood cells. So a lot of them are being broken down, and the liver can't keep up and excrete all of that bilirubin. The reason some doctors still really freak out about jaundice is if there's hemolytic disease from Rh incompatibility, then all of the red blood cells would be breaking down, and you see more pronounced jaundice with that. But some practitioners worry more than others and go, oh, we gotta check, we gotta make sure everything's okay, they're not losing all their blood, so on. The passageways in the heart and vessels also have some differences, not just the existence of the umbilical vessels, which are going to close up and turn into ligaments after birth. There are 2 methods for the blood to bypass the lungs. Just enough blood goes to the lungs to feed them. The oxygen's all coming from the placenta. So in the heart, we'll just do the inaccurate square. Looking from the anterior. There's a hole in the septum between the atria called the foramen ovale, which means the oval hole. And then got pulmonary trunk, the aorta hooking around. There's a connection there also. called the ductus arteriosus, the artery duct. So, some of the blood coming in from the body to the right atrium goes straight to the left atrium to be pumped out into the aorta. The blood coming from the right ventricle, some of that's going to go to the lungs, some will go through the ductus arteriosus and straight into the aorta. Typically, when they start breathing, that stimulates those to close up. Sometimes that can be delayed. Once it completes, this will be just a complete septum, although it usually has a bit of an indentation in it. We call it the fossa ovale. And the ductus arteriosus would turn into just a ligament. If they don't close on their own, they can do it surgically.